Hello. Hey, Harsha.
Hey, Kaushik, how are you?
Excellent. I'm good. How's everybody?
Doing well, doing well.
Mhm. Good, 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 good. You want to give folks a minute? I can actually
Yes.
make you, I will make you co-host such that you can let people in as you see them come in.
Well,
Perfect.
yes. Whoa.
Let's see. How?
Let me know whenever you're ready, Harsha. We can get started.
Yeah, I think it will probably take a couple more minutes for everyone
Okay.
to roll in.
Sounds
I
good.
do.
In the meantime, Harsha, should I send out the link to like if people want to drop their emails for the Elevate stuff? Should I do that now?
Yes, that would be great.
Okay, yeah, sure.
Yeah, maybe that's this. Oh, thank you.
Try it? I don't know if it's good.
Yeah, let's show this one there. I think it's a little cool. That one is the like individual.
Oh, okay.
Like little ones.
I was not told this information.
Do you like that?
Like, okay, got it, fine.
Yeah, yes. I also have some of
We usually get started at 7:07 because there's this thing called Harvard time. So all of our classes start 7 minutes after they're supposed to. So a lot of our clubs do as well.
That's funny. It's funny because I told you, right, I was speaking at HIA a couple weeks ago, and they said the same thing. They were like, we start at 7:15 because like, we just routinely run, 7 to 15 minutes later. So I was like, all right, that must be a thing.
Yes. 1 sec.
Worries. Oh, I recognize. So hey, Lewis is on the call. Hey, Lewis. I recognize our interaction from yesterday.
Hey, Kaushik. How are
Hey,
you?
how are you?
I'm doing well.
Excellent, excellent. I just saw familiar names.
Well, I mean, I think we can get started. As people come into the room, I can go ahead and, also just admit them, and we'll share this recording with everyone on in HFAC. But thanks everyone for coming through. Today we have a really exciting guest speaker, Kaushik Ravi, who I actually heard speak over the course of my summer. And Kaushik is running a program called Elevate, which is, I'll let him do more of the explaining of what the premise is, but it's a really great resource for students interested in finance and interested in learning about the various different career paths in finance, and also students who are interested in networking with other peers in finance through like the FNEC program, which we recently sent out an email about. Kaushik, I'm going to hand it over to you.
Thank you, guys. Thank you so much for having me, Harshal. A lot of familiar faces. I'm super excited to be back at Harvard and at HFAC. I was joking with Harsha. I was actually on campus last fall to speak to both the undergrads as well as to HBS on a similar event, but unfortunately we're now in a remote setting. So hope everyone is doing okay, remote and everything. So I'm super excited to be here. My background is in private equity and investment banking. I started my career at Goldman Sachs in our investment banking group. Spent a few years there. I'll give you sort of a background. And then I switched over to private equity as a principal at Goldman's private equity division, which is sort of a mega fund within Goldman. And then a couple years back, joined as a director at another fund to help build out their global private equity business. So super excited, I'm happy to talk about all those, I think the career journey and sort of the accelerated path in my 20s that I've been fortunate to have. As Harsha indicated, I'll also briefly touch on Elevate, which is now, I guess, becoming one of the largest sort of premier group of people as well as resources for finance and business careers. I founded that last year, and now we're partnered with I guess over 30 undergrad universities as well as organizations like yourself at HFAC around the country, and as well as the top 10 MBA programs where we kind of partner up with them as well. And the premise is to sort of, but I think the premise is basically to partner up with professionals from, private equity, investment banks, venture capital firms, hedge funds, et cetera, and sort of bring that professional perspective to all sorts of programming that we do, with the goal of sort of, opening up access to a lot of these careers that from the outside in look pretty, black box. So I think it's sort of a very practical way to think about some of these things. So I'm happy to go into some of that stuff as well. So, and I also want to try to make this interactive. So if people want to ask questions, yeah, exactly. Like Harsha said, you could put them on the chat, or you could direct message me. All the people, I think there are a bunch of people who had added on LinkedIn because they didn't want to talk about it on publicly. So I haven't gone through that yet, but I'll take care of your questions afterwards as well. So feel free to use any of these forms to reach out. I shared with you a Google Docs. I mean, that's you can put your info in, and we'll send you guys kind of all the info on the Elevate side, as well as it's helpful for me to know sort of in the audience, like who are the different years and like kind of what are the topics that we should be covering and things like that. So definitely fill that out. You get sort of like 2,000 or so, or more than 2,000 students who are kind of getting access to a lot of this stuff. So feel free to do that. Okay, so let us sort of jump in. I had a few slides that I usually present at these types of meetings or events, but I definitely want to keep this super interactive. So I encourage you guys to sort of stop me, ask questions, et cetera. So, the topic is just going to be a broad topic, career success in business, finance careers, but also more broadly in career success. How do you sort of think about it? As I mentioned, sort of my professional background, 8+ years investment banking, private equity, started out in Goldman Sachs. I think for me, the early part of my career was very formative in that I got to lead as an associate some of the largest transactions ever in financial services. So sort of including the $3 billion IPO of Synchrony, which was the largest IPO since Facebook. So that was in 2013. And then their subsequent split off, which was also one of the kind of largest M&A deals ever in 2015. And then also the divestiture of Cheap Capital, which I don't know how many of you guys know this, but that was the biggest deal ever in the space, I guess, even since the financial crisis. So very, very fortunate at Goldman to be in sort of a position, and we could talk a little bit about how do you get on these big assignments, how do you really get early on in your career? And I think,
Wait, sorry.
Share some of the tips as
Continue,
well.
sorry, Eric.
If anyone's not on mute, I suggest maybe getting on it, and then you could totally unmute yourself when you have questions and stuff. And then so that was in banking. And then sort of post that, I wanted to switch into the more of the buy side, and I can answer any questions related to that as well. I got the opportunity to join as a principal our own private equity group within Goldman, which is a $100 billion fund, where we invest sort of in equity investments. So typical LBO stuff. And sort of that was when I was probably like 26, 27. So still sort of, that point in my career, and then did that for a few years. And then I guess sort of, a couple years later, I joined Varde as a director. And then this is for more of a global role to help build out our global pre-P business. So kind of think of over a span of kind of 6 years to kind of traverse those different career paths. I'm happy to answer any questions about that. All right, so a couple other things I'll note. At GS, very fortunate to be put in a lot of leadership roles. I was chief of staff in investment banking, as well as kind of led our analyst associate committees, teams, recruiting, promotion committees, et cetera. And so I'm happy to comment on what I've seen as sort of pathways to success, or kind of key things people can do to differentiate themselves early in their career, as well as kind of the Elevate thing, which the premise of Elevate is to partner with sort of professionals from the top firms in the world, and I'll reference this as we go through it. So we've been fortunate to have on sort of a lot of professionals from the industry, from all these firms, because I truly believe that one of the best ways to learn is from people who've been successful in these different careers, as both from an understanding of these careers, but also from sort of a knowledge about breaking into some of these careers. So these are some of the professionals we've had on, and these are sort of our partnerships. And just broadly, the groups that we work with, I haven't put HFAC on here yet, but I will, Harsha. But I think, so more broadly, Harsha alluded to this. We've just built the largest sort of one-on-one sort of networking platform, where I give the opportunity for students across all these different universities and clubs that we're partnered up with. It's called Finect. And we just ran a couple cycles this fall already, and we've been thrilled with sort of the feedback. I think we just ran one, and we've got 100 students in it across these different universities and these funds. And the goal is we'll try to match people up so that they get an opportunity to meet other people from other clubs like yours, other firms that you might be going into, career interests, so on and so forth. So I will link this link actually here in the chat. I recommend, if you guys are interested, to sort of check it out. Let me do that now. And then I think that just the last point here is, so I invite you guys, if you're around. We've been having these sessions with the pros, which has been super popular with our students. Last week we had on someone from Centerbridge Private Equity. This week we're having someone from Goldman Sachs. They're a senior associate in investment banking side. So if you guys are interested, definitely check it out. It's on the website. And then, another thing, if you guys want to deep dive into these careers, we've created sort of the only training in the world, which is completely taught by professionals, like senior professionals, so partner, director, VP level people from the top firms in the world. And so super excited to have launched this across banking, private equity, and venture capital. And the whole goal is to sort of make it accessible for more students and candidates. So feel free to check that out as well. We can, if you put your email down, we'll send you all this info. And then so let me kind of start with one topic. I think, Harsha, you and I talked about sort of how do you think about careers in finance? Before I do that, let me just look at the spreadsheet and see what is the contest. If you guys don't mind at least filling it out, you could fill it out to get more info on this stuff and get on our mailing list, but also it's helpful for me to understand sort of the composition. Maybe, Harsha, you can kind of comment to me a little bit on the composition of the group, like what years and sort of what are the different career interests that people have.
Yeah, of course. So we spread this. So we have, like, just from taking a look at the list, a combination ranging from freshmen all the way to seniors. I think the majority of people are interested, especially in learning about investment banking, because that's a common route that a lot of members in HFAC take, and also in private equity, which is also kind of like, either a common route or the next step after banking for most people. So from that, I think, it would be really helpful to hear also from your perspective, how should freshmen and sophomores be thinking about investment banking? Because the recruiting cycle has gotten so accelerated to the point where you have to make these decisions quicker. So I think that would be a really helpful perspective to hear as well.
Okay, super helpful. Yeah, let's start with that. I'll go through banking and I'll also go through private equity. It's funny, I will also say this, on the Elevate side, I am working with a handful of like banks and private equity people to sort of on the recruiting side. So we'll leave that aside, but I think I'll share with you sort of what I am able to share in sort of this sort of platform. So I think, like, Harsha's absolutely right. I think the banking recruiting cycle is sort of elevated earlier and earlier. And I think that, sort of it is what it is. So I always sort of recommend, and we'll kind of go through this. Maybe we'll start off for that point. I'll hit that point, but maybe we'll start off with an overview of these sort of different fields in finance, which might be helpful for you guys as you think about different career options. Start off with investment banking, like Harsha said. The crux of the job in investment banking is client advisory and execution, right? So you're hired as an advisor to a client. Let's say it's a large corporation or a board or a private equity fund or even a company itself to help advise it on growth strategy, capital raising strategy, M&A strategy, so on and so forth. So your job is to sort of give them that strategy, but also execute on transactions that will help them achieve that strategy. So kind of think of it as sort of a financial advisor to a client or a deal. As a junior person, right, as an analyst or an associate, the majority of the job that you're working on is sort of the financial skill set of kind of financial modeling, presentations, client pitch books. So it's a lot of sort of the presentation as well as the analysis of the work that you're doing. Within Elevate, kind of across these like 30, 40 universities I work with, I'd say like 50 to 60% of my students go into investment banking across a lot of different funds, because in some sense, it sort of gives you a really strong foundation of business understanding, as well as credibility in the industry of being like, hey, I was an investment banking analyst as X, Y, and Z. So sort of, I got that experience. And so I'm reasonably trained to do whatever else that I want, right? So I think that's sort of my, view of investment banking, having been in there. Again, I have a column here on the right if folks are interested for the different professionals and sessions that we've had on. So if you guys want more information about any of these careers, you can go to the Elevate website and hear from professionals that work at all these different firms who I've interviewed as part of Elevate. So that's just what the last column is. Second area that Harsha brought up is private equity. Obviously, that's an area I would say right out of undergrad, maybe 20-ish, 15 to 20% of my students within Elevate go into these careers. So it could be on the credit side or private equity, traditional investing. My background's in traditional LBO type investing, but credit is becoming much more popular. I had on someone from KKR Credit a couple months back, and they were kind of talking about how all these funds are raising credit funds now, right? Just given where we're in the environment or the market. So it's sort of a very interesting area to think about entering for yourself. So the crux of the job in investing is sort of, now, rather than as an advisor, you're now thinking about it as an owner, right? So you're sort of finding opportunities in the market, be it, on the equity side or credit side, which gives you sort of a unique differentiated investing opportunity such that you can earn outsized returns. The difference at a junior level for this is you are deep diving a lot deeper into companies, as an associate than you would in banking, right? So you're looking at sort of 3 to 5 deals every year and really deep diving, call it like a 10,000 foot view versus sort of more of a cursory view maybe in investment banking. So that's one big difference. The other key here is I get asked this a lot. I spoke at Princeton last night, and we discussed this point to a great degree here. Like, you should really find the right fit and fun for people, right? I think a lot of people, at least on all my talks this fall, have asked about, hey, what about private equity out of undergrad? I think if you're thinking about investing, it's certainly a great option to go into, but just make sure you're diligencing the firm, the fund that you're going into, and really making sure you're getting that opportunity that's sort of the right fit as well as the right training ground for yourself. Again, we can get to that a little bit later. And the other point here is you do over time get more of an operational element as well, where you are sitting on boards or you're sitting on sort of helping portfolio companies, build themselves, build strategies, et cetera. So you could potentially also think about it as an operational job as well as a financial job. Again, we'll get into this point as well. There's sort of different types of private equity, right? You could start from the mega funds, like very, very buyout heavy, to more of the growth side, where you're looking, and we'll get to this in the VC side a little more, but that's a little more operational focus, where you're kind of helping portfolio companies as opposed to just financial engineering. Again, if people have questions on that, we can address those. Again, you can go back and listen. We've had on, folks from Blackstone, Carlyle, Warburg, some of these places where they do these type of large private equity transactions, and you can hear their perspectives as well. Venture capital, another area that's actually become very, very popular, really hard to break into. I found both with my Elevate and my MBA students right out of undergrad, or maybe even sort of without that sort of requisite experience. But obviously venture capital is the game is to find great ideas, entrepreneurs, and investing trends, right? So as we just completed our VC training, I had on a bunch of partners from there. And I think for them, the thematic there is there's sort of no one formula to get into venture capital. It's sort of very haphazard. There's very few roles in this space. So you sort of have to have something that you can bring to the table that's unique and differentiated that a VC investor would appreciate. We can get to what all that means. The big difference between VC growth and PE is basically it's earlier stage and a non-majority ownership, right? So you have to be okay with less data in order to make decisions in the VC space. Definitely these days requiring more and more of an understanding and interest in technology and kind of how that's disrupting a lot of these industries. So that's the VC side. There's a huge public investing side. A lot of your counterparts at HFAC are thinking about careers in this space. So here you have to sort of be able to operate in the public arena, where the crux of the job is investing, but you're sort of finding, your goal is to find an edge when all the information is public, right? So how do you do that, right? And a lot of firms, like we've had on multiple people from Citadel and a lot of these other funds, the goal is sort of what is differentiated about your fund? How are you able to distill data in a large quantity to kind of make these investing decisions? That's where a lot of these private equity hedge funds are headed. So that if that's of interest to you, I think that's an interesting career path. Then finally, consulting, I would say maybe like some percentage of people within Elevate would definitely go into that. If you guys are interested, you could listen to the McKinsey and other talks. Elevate was featured by McKinsey globally. So there's a big talk that we had you guys can listen to, but primarily it's a strategy operation role. So it's sort of, less finance heavy, maybe more business and company centric. Again, it's for people who want to get that understanding on the consulting strategic side. So next, on to sort of Harsha's question on investment banking, I'll just give you guys a kind of a brief overview, and then we'll dive in maybe to the extent that people are interested in. Look, I'm not going to get into this as much. The investment bank has multiple functions. If you think about a large investment bank like a JP Morgan or Morgan Stanley, where there's sort of an investment banking, but there's also sales and trading, research, asset management, all these different businesses. For the purposes of this discussion, we'll go into M&A or investment banking or corporate finance. The way I break out the world is sort of product groups on one side. So M&A, capital markets, LevFin, and restructuring. And M&A is basically the advisory game, right? So you're hired as an advisor. Capital markets is you are hired sort of as to help the company raise debt or raise equity, IPO, et cetera. Having worked on IPO transactions, I think it's an integral part of the business, within an investment bank. There's also a leverage finance group, which advises private equity firms and sort of in any large leverage transactions. So LBOs, great example. A lot of my students start out in leverage finance because that's maybe a great way to learn about the private equity space to then kind of make the transition to the buy side. And then finally, restructuring, very, very popular these days. A lot of my students are going into the Hoolahans and the Moelis and the Evercores of the world because, there is a huge restructuring push that's a skill set that's very important to learn these days, right? So again, that's kind of restructuring is kind of helping companies navigate any sort of catalyst or any sort of capital structure needs. So could be recessions, downturns like the one we're in now, structural market issues, business changes, leverage issues, cash flow issues, credit downgrades, like all that stuff, which falls under restructuring. And then I think that's on the product side. And the industry side, the way that, for instance, Goldman is structured is via industry. So if you go to an industry group, you work across all these different products. And we do have an ECM, DCM, LevFin teams, but within the industry groups, we cover all these transactions. So again, that's another consideration if folks are really interested in industry. I chose financial services because coming out of the last recession, that was the hottest space Kodori could get into. And so, whatever it is now, maybe it's tech, maybe it's healthcare, maybe it's, infrastructure and industrials, but kind of picking an industry that's of interest to you and one that you'll find challenging is another sort of big consideration as you guys sort of embark upon your careers. Let me pause there and then we'll get to sort of what recruiting and bankers or private equity firms are looking for. Do folks have any question?
I think we have a question from Sun Jun. Would you want to unmute and ask your question?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, I was just wondering, wait, is this working? Yeah, I was just wondering if there's any way that we could get access to this presentation afterwards, just because I think this is very helpful and I would love to look back on it, but if not, that's totally fine.
Yeah, let me see what I can do. I can send you guys at least a truncated version or something like that you guys can reference, or I'll put it on the website or something, that way you guys can see it.
Yeah, that would be amazing.
Yeah, no worries. Some of you guys asked me about the link to the Finec thing, so I just shared it. So to the extent that is interesting, I think I shared it. Yeah, okay, it's here. But so that's the that was the platform that I was talking about, which is the Finec platform. So if you are interested, you can obviously sign up here. There's a sign up link all the way at the bottom, so feel free to do that. Okay, so was there any other questions on this?
Can I ask you a quick question on your background a little bit?
Yeah.
Like, I'm just kind of wondering like what you thought of like Varda Partners and like how that differed from like your role at Goldman, like, or like how also like moving from VP to director, but also like how that firm was different.
Okay.
So it's like I've heard a lot about it, but never like met anyone from there.
Yeah. Yes, sure. Happy to do it. So let me talk about two things you've asked there. One is sort of I think, two things. One is sort of the VP to a director, so principal to a director role, and then large fund where I was at Goldman versus a middle market fund kind of, here. So I think those were sort of the two questions there. Look,
yeah, exactly.
I think the private equity role as a principal is one of the hardest jobs there is, right? And like this is the thing, right? When I was in investment banking at Goldman, I thought that was the hardest job there is. And then you go into sort of a principal role in private equity, and I was like, holy, this is like much harder than sort of what it was before. And then I think it eases up a little bit, I think, as you kind of expand beyond that. And let me tell you why. So as an associate, so for me, I went from Goldman kind of banking to private equity. And then I also sort of, was brought on as a principal because, kind of where I was. And so that transition is also really tough. And the reason is, as an associate at sort of a mega fund, you're doing a lot of the execution, right? So this will kind of lead into the second question as well, the difference between a large fund and a small middle market fund. But kind of an associate role at a large fund is kind of like banking 2.0. Like you're kind of the most junior person on the team. You're asked to do all the analysis. You're running through the data room, building all the models. Coordinating with McKinsey and sort of getting all the case studies done, coordinating with all these people. And so it becomes like you're very much like again, all the work sort of falls on you. When you kind of for that over to become sort of a principal vice president role in sort of a private equity role, now you're sort of responsible for the whole deal, right? So, and this is really hard. So not just are you responsible for managing the associates on the deal, you're also responsible for sort of, there's so many work streams in a private equity transaction, right? You're sort of responsible for the financing work stream. So making sure all the leverage is in place for a loan, making sure that the management, all the legal work streams are in place. All the consultants are sort of doing what they're supposed to be doing. Managing your own internal sort of investment committee and partners on the team. There's just so many sub roles within that just when you're on a deal, it's just so intense. I think it's also like everyone's looking to you if something goes wrong to sort of kind of step up and do that. So I think the principal level is really, really hard. In addition to kind of going out there, sourcing new opportunities, like building new relationships and then sitting on portfolio companies, and we'll get into what all these stuff mean. But you're sitting there being like, there's not enough hours in the day to do all the stuff that you're supposed to be doing as a principal, right? So I think that's the most challenging part of sort of navigating your time. And so I would say as a principal, your time is like the biggest resource. I mean, as any role, your time is the biggest resource, but there you also have like 10 to 15 CEOs or investment banks calling up on you every day to sort of take a meeting. And so you're turning down like 90% of your inbounds from investment banks or CEOs or meeting, management teams, because you just don't have time to invest in sort of another meeting, because another meeting means another 45 minutes just you don't have, right? So I think that's why it becomes really hard, because you're sort of managing the deal execution. You're also trying to source new opportunities, and you're also sort of managing the teams. So kind of fast forward to the kind of more senior levels as a director and so on. There it sort of eases up, because now you have like a team to like do all that stuff. So now you're really just like, not just like, but now you're building, you're building teams, and you're sort of, maybe fundraising, where you're going out to market and building businesses. So when I look back on 2019, my task was, hey, go to Asia and sort of build our business there, right? So that's a pretty open-ended proposition for someone who's never worked in Asia, right? So I think those are the types of challenges. So the challenges sort of change as you go up in the business. So maybe let me pause there. So those are sort of the differences between that principal director role as well as an associate role. Switching over to large versus small funds, this is probably like the top 5 questions I get, on any campus or any of these MBA or undergrad sessions. Sort of, how do you know what type of fund, what type of firm, what size, et cetera, that you want to go into? And so maybe let me like give you guys a little bit of a tips or some advice that I can give you on that front. The first thing is you have to really internalize and understand like what part of the job you are the most excited about, right? So I get this a lot from my analysts who are in banking, my associates who are sort of in private equity. They're like, hey, what type of fund should I be going into? And my first question back to you guys or them is, all right, what about private equity is really interesting to you? Is it the transactions? Is it the sourcing? Is it the kind of operation side? Is it, whatever it is that based on your knowledge so far, what is interesting to you? And then sort of make that be like one of the important factors in sort of making that decision. And what I mean by that is like, at a large fund, like I mentioned earlier, as an associate or even as a junior principal, it's sort of like banking 2.0. You're doing a lot of the transaction work. But if as you go down the spectrum, if you go to a middle market fund or even a growth fund, even as an associate, you're going to be asked to do a lot of sourcing. Like you'll be asked to go meet management teams and sort of build it because it's a very sort of lean organization. Like at Goldman, we would have an associate, an analyst, you know, a principal, an MD, and whatever. So you have a full-fledged thing that the director MDs are responsible for sourcing. You're not as an associate. But when you get to sort of a $3 billion fund, maybe that's your task to go kind of find new opportunities. So there's a little bit of differences between the nature of the role itself. Number two, the nature of the transactions are different, right? So at a large fund, it's a lot of financial engineering, a lot of complicated modeling, and that's where you drive alpha, right? When capital is sort of fungible, like me at a large fund is going to get the same capital structure that like someone else is going to get because we all talk to the same investment banks. We're all sort of in the market for the same thing. So you got to figure out sort of what are the additional levers that you can pull in order to, from a financial engineering side, that you can sort of get your alpha. When you kind of get to the middle market side, it becomes a little bit more about strategy. Like, how are you going to roll up these companies? Like, you know, it's not as intense. Like the models aren't going to be like 200 lines long or whatever, or like, you know, 50 tabs long. It's just going to be more like, hey, is this a company we like? What can we add to this company? What are the other things we know in the space that we can either bolt on or build on top of this? And then let's go from there. So these processes tend to be a little bit less competitive, but also it's a little bit more about what can you bring to the table. So there's definitely some differences there on the types of transactions, because look at the large companies and large funds, you're gonna be working on like the take private of like this huge company, or there's just gonna be larger, more intensive transactions, a little bit more financial engineering, and a little less like creative kind of things that you could do. Again, at the end of the day, it all sort of gets back a little bit to your own preference and type of environment that you want to work in. If you like that intensive banking type environment, then maybe the large fund is for you. But as you go on, if you sort of want more kind of economics, if you want a little bit more say in the place and also more sort of reign, I think they could do that a lot easier at sort of at a middle market fund. That said, these careers are so competitive to sort of get into and stay in, because it's a very like, you know, there's not that many private equity seats that open up. Even like I work with HBS a lot, and even there, even people come in with pre-PE backgrounds, there isn't that many principal seats that are open post MBA. So just know that these are very competitive to get into. So it's really important to find firms and strategies that you guys like, but also you think you can be well suited for, such that you can really be good at the job and sort of stay there long term, right? So that's sort of, maybe that was hopefully that was a comprehensive enough answer for your question, Jordan.
No, that's very comprehensive. Thank you very much.
Yeah, you got it. Cool. Were there other questions? Okay, let's keep going, I guess, on the deck. So I think this is another question I get asked a lot. Like, what are bankers or even sort of investors? And I'll get to the PE thing in a second. As I've sat on the other side, on the private equity, on the recruiting side, I think there's probably like, there's 5 things I always look for when I get a resume, right? Would take yourself and put yourself kind of on the other side. We would get 200 resumes at Goldman for any one role, you know, for an analyst role or whatever, associate role. And then our job and the recruiting team would be for each school to sort of go from 300 or 200 down to like 30 that we get interviewed. That's an impossible task when all the resumes look literally the same. You know what I mean? Everyone has done like the same type of experiences, et cetera. So how do you really differentiate? So on paper or interaction, I think these are some things I would, you know, kind of my suggestions. One is, especially when it comes to conversations and interviews, like demonstrating that ability to solve complex problems. That's the number one thing we ask for analysts, because a lot of times I remember first week in, you get on a deal or a task and you sort of have to figure it out. Like there's no sort of additional layers. I mean, there's people that will help you if you're sort of not sure, but a lot of it sort of relies on you. So we really rely on our junior people to be able to solve these problems from the ground up. Another thing I really look for, and I get asked this a lot, especially from underclassmen, like what are some things I could do to differentiate? My first advice is sort of join groups and sort of take leadership positions on groups if you can. So groups like, you know, HFAC and other groups like that, highly recommend, because I think as you can demonstrate sort of your performance as a leader, huge differentiator. In interviews, what I like to see is sort of some sort of a drive. It doesn't have to be financial related, but something that this person is really interested in. I think I had on a partner from Warburg the other day, and he called it sort of, what is the spark? And that's the same thing. Like when I walk out of the interview, like what is this person like? uniquely good at that we could then say, hey, this is a great candidate for this role, right? So sort of help us understand what really drives you. And I think that'll help us understand if you're sort of great for the role. Number 4 goes without saying, I think demonstrated interest in finance. I think we try to ask questions like why banking or why PE, why finance? And the people that differentiate there are people that say, hey, look, I'm really interested in this sector. I've been following this, and these are sort of in companies that are very interesting to me. Or like, hey, these are some deals I've followed in this space, and this is why sort of I think they make sense. So anything that demonstrates your ability to understand an industry or the sector, huge positive. And then finally, I look for sort of people who are able to communicate and sort of hold their own and have that sort of presence about them. And I think those are sort of, the general tips of the trade. And a couple of things I will say on the recruiting side, and this gets back to Harsh's question on how everything's so early. And this gets to both my private equity people and my investment banking people. Like private equity recruiting is super early. Like we talked about this with the Centerbridge private equity associate on Saturday in the Elevate session. Like, in years past, like when he recruited, those things happened like 2 weeks or a month into we started your investment banking job. And that's insane, right? To kind of have this all buttoned up by then. But my advice to everyone, both on the banking and the private equity side, is spending the requisite amount of time understanding these career options and figuring out if this is something for you. Like introspect on your own strengths and interests and see if this is for you. A great way to do that is to talk to people who are in these fields. Obviously, you can leverage a lot of the conversation on the Elevate side, but I think just understanding these careers, the biggest thing you could do, don't just do it because you see other people doing it. I think that's a sure way to sort of not find things that you're actually interested in, right? I think related to that, sort of understanding these careers, what are you actually going to do there as an associate? Like, don't just think, hey, I want to do 2 years of banking, 2 years of PE, 2 years of hedge fund, and then I'll sort of figure it out. Then you just spend 6 years doing something that you may or may not even like enjoy, and that's sort of like down the drain, right? So the whole goal of careers is to find those things that you're like uniquely good at. So that's sort of one recommendation. But back to the point on things happening early, once you sort of have a better sense about these things, you gotta have a laser-like focus, and sort of because these careers in recruiting favor those people who are prepared early, be it banking, be it hedge funds, be it private equity. So really getting up to speed on what you need to know to succeed there. One thing I'll say, I always focus on like 3 things, right? 3 important parts. One is in recruiting. One is networking, which is, we'll get to that in a second, but that's really, really important. Number 2 is skill building, like what you need to know to be successful in this career. And number 3 is resume building, right? You sort of one doesn't work well without the other. So I would kind of say you should be focused on all 3 as you're sort of building out your book. And yeah, so let me actually pause there and see if there was any kind of questions that came out of that.
I actually had a question, which ties in a lot of what you said about recruiting, but also earlier on careers in finance. How would you recommend students who, maybe are in banking and realize that finance isn't for them or want to transition out? Like, I know Elevate, it's to get people into finance and learn more, but sorry, that was a mischaracterization, but to educate people on what a finance career is. But for people who decide to start off in finance but know it's not their goal long term, I feel like a lot of people get flustered trying to figure out how do you leave potentially.
Yeah,
what advice would you have?
Yeah, it's a really good question. And it's interesting, right? I think it's funny. I would say over time, about like 50% of my analysts over time, I think, have not stayed in banking or private equity or whatever. So I'd say, like, let's just break it down. Like, of the people that are going to banking, about 70%, 75% of them leave banking after 2 years, right? To go, and then what do those people do? I'd say about 70% of those people go into private equity, about maybe 50 to 60%, maybe another 20, 30% go into the public investing side. And then another 20 to 30% go do a whole host of stuff like startups, corporate strategy, whatever it is, or kind of build their own company. And so I kind of say, like, absolutely, like finance careers or business careers may or may not be the right fit. And I think the biggest thing you can do early on in your career, there's maybe a couple of things. One is your careers are long, right? So there's so much pressure that's put on sort of what you do right out of college. I would say, like, if you take a more medium-term view, it's like a 30, 40-year career, right? So the goal is to sort of find that over that period of time. Being who we are, I think we're very impatient. We sort of want to get to the answer right away, which is totally fine. The reason why a lot of students who are very high, sort of like very focused early on in their career end up choosing finance or consulting is because it's in a way like, it's actually a very low risk career option. It's in a way sort of helping you sort of delay the inevitable to sort of figure out what it is that you may want to do with your life. So the one thing I challenge you guys is whether you feel like finance isn't for you or not. And frankly, investment banking is really, really tough in that, like, you know, it is, you will want to quit like 6 months in, right? So that's why I'm not saying you should stay in it. I'm not saying you should go into it. I'm just saying it's a great platform to learn about stuff, as is anything else. So if you are genuinely sort of interested in businesses, it's a place to start. But to your question, and if you sort of get a little flustered along the way and sort of think this is not right for you, I think that's awesome to kind of come to a realization like that. A year or two out of undergrad is an amazing thing to do. A lot of my people struggle, and I told you I work with a lot of MBA schools, and I go in there and then people are in their late 20s or early 30s and still trying to figure out sort of what they want to do. So sort of what I would do is go back through your list of experiences, and I think there's a lot of different buckets of this sort of this mentality. One is people who think finance is not for me, but I know exactly what I want to get into. So then it's just sort of chart out a plan of like, how are you going to get there, right? So, hey, I want to go start my own company. Well, like you need capital to start your own company. You need an idea. You need a team. You know, you need to do all these other things. So maybe a business school is right for you. Maybe you sort of do it on the side and figure that out. Or maybe you join a smaller company and figure out how growth works, right? It's funny. I had on someone from Uber the other day who was at JP Morgan investment banking, and now she's a director for all. So she's basically like head of all of South Asia at Uber. And so we had her on the Elevate platform, and we talked to her about what are the benefits of going to banking. And she's like, look, I wouldn't go back and not do banking, but I think I got out at the right time. I recommend people who have any sort of itch of that is get out early, right? So that was her view on that. And her point there is banking kind of, or finance or consulting, the longer you stay in it, it gives you this very structured mindset, which is good for that job, but may not be good for all these other jobs. Like if you really want to go in an entrepreneurial environment where you're being asked to take risks, don't stay in investment banking or consulting for more than a couple of years, because you want to be in a position where you are taking more risk and learning stuff, right? So I would say to answer that question, like look inward and figure out what is it that you're looking for. Like, are you looking for something that's more early stage? Are you looking for something that has more of a deeper impact that resonates with something you want to do? Are you looking at something that's more industry focused? Or are you still not sure? Like, I still don't know what I want to do. And then I think so that's number one, looking inward. Number two is go back to the experiences that you've had, whether it's at Harvard, whether it's HFAC, whether it's sort of other things you've done, whether it's a bank, you know, at the bank or consulting firm that you start out at, and sort of figure out, all right, what is it that I like there? Did I like the operational stuff? Did I like strategic stuff? Did I like, you know, working with people? Did I like working on my own? Did I like the data analytics? What is it that I like there? And then let's start narrowing it down based on that. And then number three, I would really like, you know, network and sort of get in the industry and figure it out. Like, it's totally okay. And I think a lot of people go through that. I think the flusteredness is fine, because at some point, guys, we're all going to realize like this path that we think has been laid out to us is not for us, right? So whether it's banking, whether it's PE or whatever, we see everyone else do it. We don't know their own internal strife. We don't know that the people in PE, like a lot of my ex-analysts hate PE, but they still were in it for a couple of years because the pay is good. You know, the reputation is good. You know, hey, I work at a mega fund. That's awesome. But their lifestyle was terrible. So they were like, I got to get out of this thing. So the sooner you can recognize that and sort of change it, more power to you. But how do you do that is a little bit more like structural, right? Because every career decision you make has sort of both a pro and a con, right? You're only sort of as good or as attractive as a candidate as the last thing you've done, right? So, or the last one or two things you've done. So make sure you're sort of going into the right roles. So the best way to do that is to diligence the firm, due diligence the stuff. But another great strategy for that is like, don't be afraid of failure. Like you go to a small startup firm or fund. If it blows up, that's okay. You've just learned something in a couple of years that you can then translate to do something else. So sort of use all your experiences to your benefit. Don't be afraid of taking risk early in your career, but also know that these careers are just supposed to be like starting grounds. Like 70% of them may not even end up in finance, but I think, you know, but it's a good place to sort of figure out what is it that you want to do with your life if you don't know yet. So again, there's really no pressure in that other than what you put yourself. Don't try to compare yourself to other people, where they are, et cetera, because you really don't know how they feel, whether they like their job or not. It's kind of the secret to career success, I think, is defining those things that you're actually happy about. Because the secret to career success is to being the best at what you can be. You'll only be really good at what you can do if you can wake up and be like, hey, I really want to look at investing trends. I really want to wake up and give this person strategic advice. It's funny because I asked my partners at Goldman, like, hey, why did you stay in banking for 20 years? Like, it seems like such a crazy lifestyle and job. Like, you're traveling all the time. Like, it's just so intense. Like, I don't think I want to do it. And they were like, well, like, you know, for me, I like the client aspect of it. Like that was the end of the day. Like I like talking to people, giving them advice. Obviously as a partner, I'm not doing the modeling and whatever. So I understand like how crappy the analyst associate job can be sometimes, but you know, I like it because of X, Y, and Z reason. I was like, all right, well, good for you. I don't like that reason you just said, so maybe it's not for me, right? So I think I had to sort of make my own decision. And which is the last thing I'll say on this topic is just listen to people who've done this and sort of what their experience has been and try to learn from that. You're not going to be able to do, you know, banking, VC, PE, hedge fund, all in your 20s, you know, at the same time. So sort of listen to people who've done it, why they've done it, what they've liked about it, what not, and see how that resonates with yourself. And bring it back to the Elevate thing. You're right, Harsha, like we've talked about it, but I kind of bringing all these speakers and giving you guys access to that, I think is one of our goals, is to sort of make that decision hopefully easier, because it's really hard for, I think, for undergrads to be like, hey, I want to go talk to someone at Blackstone or KKR and sort of get on the phone with them, right? So I think the goal is to at least hear and learn from their rationale and experiences and see if that aligns with what you're doing. But don't put too much pressure on yourself, but at the same time, sort of like be introspective every 6 months, sort of feel like, are you on the right path? Sort of what makes sense for you. So anyway, so hopefully that's helpful on that.
Yeah, no, that was incredibly helpful. And I told you this too, like when I was deciding which direction to take my career, I thought the Elevate conversations and the questions you were asking were really relevant. So
excellent. Yeah, I'm happy to hear that. I think the feedback even for the live sessions has been like amazing. And the live sessions, what we're doing is, we're trying to do, we're giving you guys the opportunity to ask and network, right? So last session, we had like 15 students across all my different schools, like ask questions of the speaker. So the whole goal is like, in a COVID environment, can we recreate some of this networking environment, you know, some of this sort of, that whole thing which is sort of lost. So I appreciate that, Harsha. I appreciate the kind words about Elevate. All right, Justin, I think had a question.
Yep.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, thanks for taking the time. I guess my question is related to, you know, if we know what like subsector of finance we want to go into, say like we want to work at like a credit hedge fund or something like that. I'm curious how you think about going through understanding what the landscape looks like, you know, the larger players, the smaller players, their investment mandates, as well as like culturally what they're like, and how you would advise a student to go about that process.
Yeah, and you said the hedge fund space, Justin, is that right? Or just was that an example?
Yeah, that like hedge funds, specifically credit hedge funds, maybe, I don't know.
Okay, let me share with you one thing. I'll just point to our thing, but I'm just gonna share with you this thing where basically, just as an example, these are just an example set of companies, but maybe it's a place to start where I asked people at different careers, like, or different firms. So this is sort of, you know, the private equity hedge funds and people that we've had on our platform. Again, it's just a small subset. I sort of asked them that question. Why your company, you know, why do you like it, et cetera. So the best place to start is to hear from people who are there and why they're there, sort of why, you know, why they stayed there and kind of what their journey is into there. Your question is really good because the hedge fund space is a little bit more like less concrete, right? So there's a lot of different funds doing a lot of different things. And so the educational component there is a lot higher than, you know, there's only like 25 investment banks or some number of global investment banks, and you sort of know what they do and you can kind of get an indication. I think on the hedge fund side, I would sort of start by yourself, sort of figuring out what is it that you think you like. Like, do you like the credit side? Do you like sort of the long short side? Do you like things that are more long dated? Do you like, you know, things that are just much more short? And do you like things that are more macro? Because generally, I would say there's in the hedge fund world, and I'll share with you guys actually a Harvard alum that I had on Elevate, who's at Citadel, and we were talking about this topic where there's sort of a reversion to sort of, or convergence in some ways to the larger funds becoming more kind of efficient, but also sort of continue to take market share from everyone else. And that's because of multiple reasons. It's because of data reasons, because of sort of their resources and sort of the people talent behind this. But his view was, look, over time, I think larger funds are going to become much more of like multi-dimensional. So they'll be doing a lot more things, but all house everything sort of internally. So that's one thing to think about on the hedge fund side. But I would start with sort of what is it about that space that interests you and sort of, you know, what you want to do. And then the other best ways is to sort of, you know, beyond maybe some of the speakers we have, just to reach out to people who are alums, et cetera, and just get a better sense of what is it that they do day to day. Because a lot of times you'll say, hey, I love the idea of going working at Citadel, but Citadel is a multi-billion-dollar entity, right? So they'll be doing 500,000 different things in there. So what in it that is really interesting to you? And so I would sort of narrow it down by function a little bit more as well, such that you can get a better sense, and then reach out to people who are in those different functions and sort of see. Both hedge funds and private equity have always been sort of this very shrouded. I mean, hedge funds, both of them by virtue of they're designed, right? You don't want to really share sort of, you know, how you invest or kind of what are the things that you do. But when you get people one-on-one, they'll be a little bit more, you know, inclined to share with you on this and on what they do. Last thing is to just get experience. I don't know what year you are, Justin. So if you can just get real experience at some of these funds and understand what is the difference between what they do, what they say they do, and what they actually do, and what is the role of a junior person? What are the skills you need to have? Do you see yourself here in this role successful for the next 2 to 3 years? What are the exit ops like? You know, all that stuff becomes really important. But I mean, like, those are just some resources I can kind of sort of give to your way. We are actually right now working on a hedge fund training from me and a couple people from Citadel who are helping me kind of put it together. So hopefully it'll be ready in the next few months for you guys to, you know, go into. But generally, you know, we did that in banking, we did that in private equity, we've done the venture capital now, we're trying to tackle the hedge fund space. So hopefully when I speak to you guys again in a few months at some point, you can use that as a reference as well. But the Citadel one I'll point to is here, I'll send you that link as well. There's just a ton of resources on our thing. I think Harsha alluded to this. So here's the sort of what we're calling the academy, but there's basically all the talks with all the professionals that I've had on my platform. So you guys can go check it out to the extent that, you know, hedge funds or whatever's interest. We are now looking to actually take all these discussions we've had over like 50 of these professionals on, or maybe 30, 40 of these professionals on, and kind of chop them up so that you guys can just, all my students can just go in and say hedge funds interviews, you know, hedge funds like exit ops, whatever, and create sort of an on-demand resource portal. So that will be coming out very soon, hopefully in the next few weeks. Someone's working on it on my team. So anyway, so that is that on the hedge fund side. Is that helpful, Justin?
Yeah, that was really helpful. Thank you so much.
Yeah, of course, you got it. Okay, what else? Was there any other questions? And here's the thing for the Finec thing, if folks are interested.
I had a quick question.
Yes.
Kind of going off of where, like, I guess the opposite end of what Harsha was asking. Like, what advice would you give to like someone who like maybe like started in something else like tech and is now wanting to go into finance, especially like in terms of like recruiting? What like advice would you give there? Like if a lot of your experiences
it's a good
beforehand
question.
were,
Can I ask you like what I like to like customize this and help you guys out. So what level or like what year are you and sort of what are you looking to do?
Yeah. So I'm a sophomore right now. I've had like experience like doing like investment banking internships, but like just short term. And then like during the summer, I did a software engineering internship, and next summer I'll be at Morgan Stanley Tech. But I'm more really interested to do like investment banking. And like
so wait, what Morgan
there.
Stanley Tech are you going to? Like what is that?
Like yeah, so I'll be actually doing like their application development for
okay, got it. The tech side. Got it. Okay, so first of all, you're a sophomore, super early. So I think you're still like lots of, you know, super early in the sense that there's kind of, you still have two years to sort of nail this down. You should really be focusing. So the most important thing for you is going to be your story, right? So why finance, kind of coming from a technology background? It's interesting. I spoke at Stanford, and we get this question a lot. A lot of people go work as a product manager or whatever. They have the programs in all these tech firms in the summer as a sophomore, and then they realize like, you know, it's great, but it's sort of not what they wanted to do. And so now they want to kind of transition to the next thing. And that same advice I gave them that I give to you guys is, or that question is, in a conversation or interview, what you need to communicate is like, hey, this is my tech background. This is what I've done, but note that I've done investment banking internships and I've worked in sort of finance companies in the tech function. But the most important thing in what you need to convince them is why banking and sort of why finance and why that's interesting to you. So I think it could be anything from the range of like, and try not to denigrate tech, obviously, and which is crazy because it's the hottest space ever. So people will look at you like you're crazy. But I think, you know, you have to sort of, you know, I think say like, look, I think what really interests me sort of both. So I think how I position, if I got asked a question, this is what I would say as my answer. I would say, look, guys, like I've always been really interested in both finance and technology. I decided to start out doing some internships in technology and sort of seeing how that sort of fit. I also did internships in finance. So now I'm in a position where I can compare and contrast both of them. I'm in a unique position where I've done both. You mentioned you've done investment banking and you've done tech. So great. I'm like very unique in that I can compare and contrast both. I like investment banking or finance for this reason, because, you know, great transactions, people, you know, business strategy, you know, the finance mindset and sort of looking at companies in a business side, I prefer that to sort of what I'll be doing in a tech capacity. Therefore, I'm applying for finance. So I think that's that's how I lay out your answer to that question. And then the second thing I would do is just reach out to as many people as possible. I think for you, naturally, things like tech investment banking, tech private equity, tech investing sort of come to mind, just given your background. Like, I would say, I'll give you this other color of my 30 universities, kind of all these premier kind of groups, 50% of my students want to go into tech investment banking. So it's like the hardest sort of most right now challenging group to get into. And I do have a ton of people like in the Finec platform that are going to like, the Menlo and San Francisco offices at all these different places. I think one thing from them is sort of first of all, establish your networks in that space. So like reach out to all these different banks, Harvard alums or whatever, HBS alums, another great place. I think you guys have a really great business school attached to you. So sort of reach out to them as well. Start building your connections now for sort of your sophomore, junior year internship, right? So that's what I would say. Look, I have this tech background, I have the banking background, build your connections, but also sort of build your story and kind of build your understanding of the tech space. So you can say, hey, look, I've been tracking the tech industry. Like, I know these are the deals that are going on. These are the companies that are raising capital. These are the people that are going into IPOs. This is why this is interesting. So the more you can sort of bring that finance mindset and sort of that knowledge to the forefront, the more you'll be, they'll be like, oh, this person actually really understands what's going on in the tech M&A space, really understand what's going on in the IPO space. Therefore, I don't have to worry about that they have a super tech background. I know that they sort of get it and whatever. So again, those were like 4 or 5 strategies. Hopefully that's helpful.
Yeah, no, that's definitely so helpful. Thank you so much.
Yeah, you got it. Let us maybe take a couple more questions that people might have. I will share the Google Docs thing again if folks want to sort of get info, the newsletters, there's upcoming sessions. Oh yeah, I'll also share the upcoming session with you guys. So this is the session I'm having on a senior associate from Goldman IBD this Saturday. Obviously, if folks are interested, we'll just be doing like live Q&A, fireside chat type stuff if folks are interested. But anyway, so any other questions for the folks here? Let me touch PE really quickly, folks. I think the PE thing, I think the one thing I look for in private equity, having done all these different interviews and stuff over time, is sort of the investor mindset. I think you guys may have heard that a lot in other places. But what I look for in sort of the associate candidates, like I'll say, hey, pick a deal that you worked on, right, in investment banking, or pick a deal that you worked on in consulting, or pick a company that's of interest to you or an industry space. And really, I'm going to want to dig in with you guys and understand sort of why you think that's a good. So my question to you will be, would you invest in this company? Like, why, at what price? Why do you think it's interesting and why not? And that's what I want to really understand from you guys. So one of the other questions I get asked a lot is, what can I do to prepare sort of for private equity? And my answer always is like, pick 3 or 4 industries that you guys can really dive into, subsectors, and really understand 3 or 4 different companies. Like, read their 10Ks, read whatever parts of their 10Ks, read their investor presentations, so on and so forth, where you can sort of get a better sense on what is it that they do and why, and why are those business models unique? How do they make money? What are their competitors? What is unique about them? All that stuff is what I will get into in sort of your private equity interview. So really, really important to me for someone to establish that they understand companies from an investor's perspective. And so that's what I always look for in those type of interviews, in addition to all this other stuff that we talked about in terms of, the drive, the leadership, and all that other stuff. Is that helpful? Okay. Okay, so Harsha, anything else from you guys that you want me to hit?
I think you covered a lot of the questions that I was talking with a couple of people beforehand too, that a lot of people are interested in hearing. And thank you so much for taking the time to do this. I feel like this is the perfect time to do it as juniors head into their junior internships, and as sophomores, are starting to think about next semester.
Yeah. So for the sophomores, I would anticipate sort of the tech investing banking usually goes first. So kind of think about it sort of, early spring, late winter time but I think what you guys need to really be doing is start developing some of those relationships now, such that people can pick you off a page, pick you off a resume book to sort of do that. I mentioned the FinEc platform that'll give you an opportunity to meet other people from other schools who are in that same boat. So people that are recruiting, et cetera, you can compare notes, you can have, study sessions, whatever with them. But more broadly, I think that's for the sophomores. For juniors, look, I think my expectations next summer is going to be live and in person, but, we're going to have a bunch of fireside chats with, people who went through the summer this summer, both, remote and not, such that, we'll invite all you guys to it. But we did this last year and it was really popular, kind of what worked, what didn't, how do you really, work in a remote environment. And then finally, for the people that are going into jobs, I think really use your senior year to build relationships. Like, I can't emphasize enough how I think in college, you sort of get in this like false sense of security that, hey, I have my job, I'm good. But the rest of your career is about sort of the relationships you can build, and the earlier, the better. So I think Bhavendra had a question. So maybe let's hit that one very quickly.
Yeah, thanks. So I'm actually a visiting undergraduate student. So
Okay.
I'm from Copenhagen Business School, and I'm graduating next year,
Okay.
where I'll be working at a middle market tech investment bank boutique.
Okay.
And my question is actually, how would you go about if you wanted to work at a bulge bracket investment bank?
Yeah. What year are you?
So I'm a senior.
Okay. So
I'm quite late.
No, I mean, it's fine. You're like 23 or whatever. It's not late. So I think like you just have to figure out sort of for yourself what does that pathway look like, right? So I think whatever you start off with is sort of not what you end up with. So like kind of figure out why you want to do bulge bracket, right? If you kind of get, obviously the name and the reputation is great and the type of deal experience, but a lot of times there's a lot of great exit ops that come out of kind of middle market as well. I think the biggest thing you could do is sort of translate that internship or whatever that you have into sort of building your network. Like, I think just reaching out to people, and then if you have an industry of interest, right, if it's tech or whatever it is that you're working on, just hone into that. Reach out to people in the TMT group, reach out to people in the healthcare group and say, hey, I'm around and I can kind of do this. A lot of people recruit for the full-time out of their summer class, but look, private equity firms, we're working with a bunch of them on the Elevate side, on the recruiting side, they're looking to fill undergrad classes for next year, like full-time classes. So as a result, there's gonna be spots that are created at the bulge bracket side who are gonna kind of go into private equity rather than banking right away, because fee firms are looking to kind of staff up now. So I think there's gonna be opportunities created for sure. The biggest thing I'd say is build that network and sort of be ready. Sort of when you get a call or when sort of people say like, just have a story, have it kind of worked out, and then sort of give them a reason to hire you, right? Say, I've done all these different things that make me positioned to do this, and I'm ready to kind of kill it. I'm very focused on getting a bulge bracket thing. That I think shows a lot if you are focused and sort of ready to attack. I think that's a huge thing. So again, not like great sort of solid kind of tangible advice there, but just sort of anything you can do to just get in front of people and present yourself, and then just continue on the networking side. I think that would be super, super helpful. Anyway, those are just my thoughts.
That makes sense. Thank you.
You got it. All right. Well, it's a little past 8, so I'll let you guys go. And yeah, so definitely, I think the takeaways are, if you haven't signed up on the FinEc stuff and are interested in networking, definitely do that. And then drop your email into this if you want more information, and then sign up for the upcoming events if you can. But really happy to sort of be back at Harvard, and hopefully we'll get to do this again in person soon. So so thanks, Harsha and team Lewis and all you guys for having me on here.
Yes, thank you so much. And yeah, we'll be sure to forward any speaker events that you send our way as well.
Oh, no worries. Yeah, just be engaged. There's just like a wealth of information. And so just invest in yourself and in learning about these careers. Again, this is not a way to say go into business careers. It's sort of let's learn about them such that you're better ready for the recruiting process as well as your own decisions. It's a long career. There's no kind of start end date. And it's a little bit about your own success and how you measure it. So kind of think of those things as you make these decisions. So anyway, really glad to be here, guys. Look forward to it. And yeah, have a great rest of the night. See ya.
Thanks a lot. Bye.